Start off with a kid screaming, hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast. In response to OPEC's announcement that they were going to be lowering oil production, the Biden administration said that they're going to further release oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We're going to be talking about this, why the administration is doing it. Also, several months after Biden signed an executive order about central bank-backed digital currencies, the White House released a fact sheet about their plans to move forward with a CBDC. We're going to be talking about all of this and more in episode 366 of the In the Tank podcast. All right. Yeah, there's a little bit of a play date going on over here. So if you hear kids in the background, they're not working in my cobalt mines. They're just having fun. So welcome to the Tank podcast. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendal. And joining me today, I've got Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute and co-author of Glenn Beck's latest book, The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism, which just crossed over the 7,000 review mark on Amazon. I know Justin keeps track of that. What's going on, Justin?
Yeah. I'm tired. Writing 7,000 reviews isn't easy. But yeah, I've got a question I want to throw out to the public. So I moved to a new state. I'm not going to tell people where because otherwise Antifa will be camped out on my front lawn.
Alaska.
But I moved to another state, not Alaska. And so you don't have to worry about that, Antifa, if you're worried about going to Alaska. And I'm in the process of registering to vote, which apparently you can do entirely by mail in this insane place. And I have to choose between all these different political parties now that are out there. And apparently there's more than just your standard Republican and Democrat political parties. I didn't know this, but apparently this is the case. We all have heard, of course, of the Libertarian Party, so we can throw that into the mix, right? But we also have the Independent Party. I don't know what that is.
Oh, sweet.
That's not independent. That doesn't mean you read it. It's an independent party.
Sure.
Then there is the Constitution Party, which I think I've heard of, maybe, but I have no idea what it is, really. The Pacific Green Party, which I think is different than the Green Party. Then there's the Progressive Party. Then there's also the Working Families Party, which I don't know. I am a working family, so maybe that's where I'm going to go. I'm not entirely sure. And then there's just other with a line that lets me write something else in.
Oh, sweet. Put communist.
Which seems to suggest that either there's a whole bunch of other parties that they just couldn't fit onto the form for whatever reason, or you could just make your own party whenever you feel like it, and you just scribble it into this voter registration mark. So for those who are, in the live chat here, maybe you could just give me a suggestion. What do you think? It could be Republican, Constitution, Independent Party. I don't know what they believe, but who knows? Libertarian, Pacific Green Party, Working Families Party, Progressive Party, or do I create my own political party and start my own movement?
I think you should start your own. I think you should start your own. I think I'm
going to call it the Justin Haskins Party.
Yeah, it's long past time. It's a long past time that you create your own political party.
You're right. That's true.
Also joining us, we have Chris Talgo, senior editor here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Doing good. And yeah, so Donnie, we are about a month away from the big election. And I don't know about you guys, but man, am I getting really sick and tired of these political commercials.
Just all those Pacific Green Party
all day,
ads.
all long. Oh, geez.
Yeah.
It's only going to get worse from here.
Another Working Families Party ad. I just can't handle it.
Yeah, all the road signs. That's the thing that I get most annoyed by. It's
really?
all those
like
signs
the
on the corner.
Signs.
Oh, what? Ugh. No, thank
What,
you.
would you rather see a piece of trash or blowing down the street or
wait,
like,
that's the option? That's the option. I have to pick between those.
In Illinois, yeah. Probably.
For every one of those road signs, that's one piece of trash that's picked up. That's the Justin Haskins party guarantee. For those people that are in the chat, you'll see that Jim Lakely is in the chat. He is not on the screen. That is because he has some family matters to take care of. So he is traveling across the country right now via road trip. So he's listening in. Hopefully he's keeping his eyes on the road and not on trying to respond to any of the points that we're going to make here. But wish him good luck in all of his ventures here. And it's just going to be us three holding down the fort. So then also, before we get into any of the topics, I have to say this at the beginning of every podcast, which is to help us by just doing a couple simple things. Hit that like button, hit that share button, write a comment underneath the video. All these things help break through that big tech algorithm that prevents content like this from being shown to more people. Also, we've created a In the Tank podcast channel on YouTube because YouTube threatened to destroy our main Heartland channel because of some of the controversial things that we say. So if there's going to be an episode where we might be tiptoeing into some controversial territory, we might only stream it on that In the Tank channel. So to ensure that you don't miss an episode, make sure to subscribe to that separate channel. So, gentlemen, before we get into the topics at hand, I was thinking about our last episode. So our last episode, Justin wasn't a part of it, but I told you about it. It was titled, "Is the Climate Cult Crumbling?" or some variation of those words. And in that podcast, we talked about the major banks like Bank of America, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase that have all lined up behind the Great Reset and ESG. We talked about the massive asset management firms like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and all of them that are lining up behind the Great Reset and ESG. And we also talked about Al Gore and Davos, which are some of the biggest advocates of the Great Reset and ESG. And the point of the episode was that the Climate Alliance seemed to be fracturing a little bit. They're not seemingly completely on the same page. And, but it still highlighted that these major players that we're up against in this fight over climate alarmism and worse over a suicidal energy policy. And this doesn't even take into account the role the government plays in all of this, the fleet of think tanks like the Sierra Club that have budgets that are far larger than ours. And like I said, I was thinking about this latest episode, and I thought, we really are the underdogs in this fight. And to say that, that's like a David and Goliath story is really underselling the reality of the situation. It's more like David versus 20 super Goliaths. and if you look at how our opponents depict us, they somehow think that it's the complete opposite. In their mind, we're the Goliath. And we're funded by big oil and the Koch brothers. And we're just picking on poor old Greta Thunberg. And all she wants to do is try to save the planet from, us terrible people wanting to pour toxic waste into the water supply. Justin, what do you think about this? Am I overstating things?
No, I mean, not at all. I mean, I don't think one of the funniest things that I've learned working for the Heartland Institute, and I learned this very early on. This is a lesson that if you write for Heartland or you go on TV, you're visible at all. You get a lot of hate mail, and you get a lot of people on social media saying all these terrible things about you and whatever. But one of the main talking points that you get from people on the left is that you guys we can't believe anything you say. Doesn't matter what facts or figures you throw out there. Doesn't matter what kind of government report you cite. Doesn't matter. And none of that matters because at the end of the day, you work for the Heartland Institute and they are, stooges of the Koch brothers and big oil and the way that they always present it is that we've been bought off by these massive interests and that there's just this money sitting in just bowls, just wads of cash just around the office. And all you got to do is you just walk over and you grab a fistful of, 10,000 Coke bucks and you walk away. And it's that's what life at the Heartland Institute is like. And it's the opposite is actually the case. All of these organizations, including organizations that most regular people have never really heard of, have budgets that are 5 times our budget. And it's not an exaggeration. For example, 350.org, which
Mhm.
people in our universe, we know what 350.org is. But the average person walking down the street does not know what 350.org is. Okay.
Sure.
They routinely raise $20-30 million in a year. Routinely. That's just common. And most people don't even know who they are. So it's like, there's a like if you start looking at organizations like the Brookings Institute and like all these other kinds of places, they have so much money that it's impossible to act, not to mention all the government funding that goes into these various studies and things that are meant to just to varying degrees undermine our views and stuff. There is so much money. I honestly don't even know what the ratio is, but it's gotta be like 1,000 to 1. Like it's gotta be, right? It's gotta be something like that when you add up all the money. So the idea that we are, you know, we're always really what it is it's pathetic. Like, if you guys can't beat us with all of your money, and they haven't, because do we have the Green New Deal? Do we have these big elaborate policy? Not really, right? They have little victories here and there. We've had victories, but they have not gotten what they wanted, despite the fact that they have like 1,000 to 1 advantage.
Certainly not 1,000 times more victories than us.
Definitely not. Definitely not. So it's like,
but that's the point I wanted to make too, because it's like, for all of this, for all of the odds stacked against us, we are, for the most part, like holding our own ground. And like, I have no doubt whatsoever that we've had an impact. Like, the Heartland Institute represents a backstop that like underpins the counter narrative to the climate change alarmists. And whenever you hear like, you know, either you listening or a friend of yours or something like that, or even Steven Crowder or Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, when you hear them pushing back against the climate narrative, they're either directly or indirectly drawing from a pool of knowledge that the Heartland Institute helped fill. And now I know that I'm biased and I'm coming off as like tooting our own horn here, but I am surprised at how much of an impact that we have as the little guy in this fight. I'm shocked at how much we're able to achieve. And to just that one point that you made, Justin, about like this idea that we're just like grabbing cash out of these like Coke funded, you know, money stashes all over the place. It's like, of course, that's not true at all. But like, I've done 300. This is 366 episode of this show. I have not been once told by any Koch brother stooge or any big oil person what to talk about in the slightest bit. And not only that, but I haven't been told what to say or cover on this show by like even anybody in the Heartland Institute. So it's just basically me and Justin and Jim coming up with topics.
Not only that, but I'm pretty sure that no one on the show has this as their job responsibility in their contract. Like, I don't even think we're getting paid to do this, as far as I can tell. And you sure as heck weren't when you started this show. No one said, hey, you know, it's part of your job responsibility. You got to launch a podcast. Like, that never happened. So it is hilarious how they paint it like our people who are on our side have all been bought off, when in reality, I don't think I've ever spoken to a single person from the Koch Foundation or from like any of those major groups that you always think of. I don't think I've had been in a single meeting with any of them. I'm not saying that we haven't had people who have done that before at Heartland, but the point is, like, we're not in any way beholden to them. I have no idea what they even think about most things, to be totally honest with you.
I see a comment in here, and I can't verify the veracity of this comment, but it says Koch brothers spent $500 million to defeat Trump. Again, not sure if that's true. Abel Windsor seems like a pretty stand-up person there, so I don't think he's going to steer me wrong. But like, if that's the case, I'm not in favor of that. Like, I liked Donald Trump. I supported him. Chris, what do you think about all this? Yeah. Are we just giving ourselves too many pats in the back?
No, I think the Heartland Institute punches above its weight. And I think one of the best examples of that is Joe Bast, you know, the founder of this, you know, great place, was at the White House signing ceremony when President Trump decided to get out of the Paris Climate Accords. And, you know, Joe Bast was one of the people that was, you know, behind that entire thing. But Donnie, I also just think that this is part of a larger picture here. I remember back, in the like early to mid 2000s when the narrative was that the Republicans have all the businesses in their back pockets.
Yeah.
Republicans, get all the money from big corporations, and Republicans outspend Democrats when it comes to elections and basically everything. The exact opposite is true. Barack Obama was the first candidate to ever raise $1 billion when he, soundly defeated John McCain. And then in 2012, he raised way more than Mitt Romney, even though Mitt Romney, they tried to portray as, Mr. Monopoly.
Sure.
And then same thing with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. Donald Trump ran a bare bones campaign compared to Hillary Clinton. And then same with Joe Biden versus Trump in 2020. So this notion that the right, whether it's, the mainstream right or the libertarian right or whomever is, just has Scrooge McDuck type, money vaults, that we're just like swimming in. It's just completely unfounded when the total opposite is true. George Soros is, spends billions on elections that, that he basically buys. I don't know any major Republican, investors who are doing that. So
yeah.
Right.
And just real quick, like to kind of wrap this up. If you were to look at, so like the Koch brothers are the most notable, like famous, big money conservative donors, right?
Sure.
Everybody's heard of them. But if you were to look at a list of like the biggest donors to political campaigns and things like that over the past, 10 years, the Koch brothers, if I remember right, are like, they're like in the 30s or something. They're like way down there.
Really?
And you have like teachers unions and labor unions and all these other people who are much, who are pushing for predominantly left-wing candidates, not exclusively, but predominantly way higher up on the list. So, which is why everything that Chris just said is true. It's why are Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, all these people raising so much more money? Well, because they have more big donors. That's why. Yeah. So again, the idea we're all beholden. And by the way, Exxon, because we didn't mention this, but all of the big oil companies, many of the big oil companies are all 100% in on the other side of this issue anyway, like which most people don't even realize, but they're funding all of these like green energy projects. They're buying up green energy companies. They're pouring tons of money into that. So the idea that
they have ESG
money,
scores.
Yeah, of course they do. Of course. Yeah. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and just like the other point, and I won't spend a whole lot of time making this point. I've said it on other shows, but like the whole idea of the Great Reset and ESG and all of that, like we brought that from obscurity. Some people talked about it, ESG. It almost seemed like some like stock language jargon or whatever, but like we brought that to the forefront of the national conversation. And who told you to do that, Justin? Nobody.
Who told me
Justin just found a bunch of weird quotes of these people aligned with the World Economic Forum talking about the Great Reset. We're like, we should do something about this. Nobody told us to do it. So again, it's just another example of just like, not this massive funding, but just like elbow grease that we were able to take that topic, explain how important it is, and bring it to like a national attention. It's astonishing. It's just another kind of surprise of how much of an impact we have as such a relatively small organization.
And Donnie, just real quick, this transcends the environment topic. Think of big pharma, colluding with the left to get vaccine mandates and stuff. So this is across many different industries and sectors.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. All right. We spent enough time talking about that. I want to get to our main topic of the day, which is talking about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Andy, there's a wonderful graph that I'm probably going to reference a couple of times. If you just Google Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it's like a reddish graph. If you could pull that up whenever you have a moment. But there's been a couple of, we've talked about this before, but there's been a couple of developments. I mentioned some of it in the intro of the podcast, but OPEC, even after Biden groveled to them to produce more oil to counter the loss of oil that the West was getting from Russia, OPEC announced that they are going to cut production of oil by 2 million barrels a day. The response by the Biden administration was to increase the use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So I wanted to have a conversation about this move by the administration and kind of question the official story for this move. Actually, that's a lie. Justin proposed this topic. I just wanted to, I just simply concurred. That's not the chart I was looking for. Find the other one. So I want to start off with a little bit of history here. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was created in 1975 after the 1973 oil embargo caused massive disruption in the market. So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or the SPR, is less than 50 years old. So when it was created, Joe Biden was what, like 60? So the government expanded the capacity of this reserve through the 90s and through the 80s and into the 90s to just under 600 million barrels. So the SPR was tapped into a couple of times, but not substantially. So in the early 90s, the Iraq-Kuwait crisis, they tapped into it a little bit. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, during the Arab Spring in 2011. But none of these things amounted to more than a couple of drops in the bucket. Maybe they took out 25 million barrels here, but then they replaced it, a couple of years later. That's also not it. I'll find it once somebody else starts talking. So in the 2000s, the SPR was increased to over 700 million barrels of oil. According to 2019 numbers, the U.S. consumes about 20 million barrels of oil a day. So a 700 million barrel stock would keep the country running for about 35 days, a little over a month. Now, of course, this is nothing more than a back of the envelope math figure. Surely if the U.S. faced some complete shutdown of oil production, our consumption rates would lower, but I'm just giving you a reference number for later. So before we get into what's going on now, Chris, do you have anything to kind of add on to kind of the historical perspective of all of this?
No, I think you did a really good job of summarizing it. In the 1970s, we understood that, the Saudis and OPEC could, cut off our oil supplies and really harm our economy. So what did we do? We created Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and every president up to President Biden has been a good steward of it. And Donald Trump, during the pandemic, when the price of oil, was near all-time lows, what did he do? He filled it basically to the brim, and here we are, as I'm sure you'll get into, and it is no longer near capacity.
Yeah. So I just sent the chart to you, Andy. So it's just at the top of this page here, but it's a good chart, and I want to show it because it kind of shows, like, even when we did tap into it during those couple of occasions that I mentioned, that you could see that, like, it's relatively tiny compared to how we're tapping into it now. So what's happening now? Starting in March, the Biden administration okayed the release of 1 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve a day. So this has resulted in the use of 160 million barrels of crude, or about 1/4 of the entire reserve. All right, so here's the chart. So you could see the actual, if you're watching the video version of this, I'll try to include the link in the show notes. But you see, like, at the bottom there with those little green bar graph, and then there's little red marks as well. That first one in, like, the early 90s, that's the Kuwait Iraq issue. If you look at 2005, you could see a couple of marks there for where they took some oil out of this thing. Same thing with 2011. But if you compare that to the far right of that chart, where you just see this giant red mass, that it makes those other things just look like blips on the radar. So that just kind of shows you the comparison of what we're taking out now compared to any other time in the history of this thing. So let's see. So in March, when the release started, the price of crude oil jumped to $120. It fluctuated between there and $100 for the next, like, 4 months. Again, hitting $120 in the heart of the summer months, right around July. But since July, the price has been steadily declining, dropping to under $80 by the end of September. Yet the release of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve continued. Now the price is jumping again because of OPEC's announcement. So the Biden administration, after not taking their foot off the gas, only has the option of further pressing down on the gas pedal, announcing an additional 10 million barrels to be used. So, Chris, I mean, do you think that it was a a bad move originally? Do you think that we should have taken our foot off the gas, as I put it, when the price of oil, crude, whatever started dropping? What's your kind of take on this official account of what happened?
Okay, so when I look at this graph, going back from 1982 to 2022, as you said, 1990 we had a war, 2000 we had a giant recession, 2011 we had another giant recession. I can see, during those periods how there was a need to take out, increments of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve because it's there for things that are are disasters. But what's happened in 2021 through 2022 is the Biden administration came into office and they said we want to stop domestic oil production, but we don't want to deal with the political consequences that would entail. So what are we going to do? We're going to deplete our Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to keep the price of gas as low as possible, which worked, basically through the summer. Although I would argue that a lot of that was due to the fact that demand was down because so many Americans are not driving as much, and the economy is still in somewhat of a slumber coming out of the pandemic. But here's the thing: that was supposed to end October 31st. The initial announcement from Biden. What is going to happen after October 31st? Gee, Donnie, we've got a midterm election about 10 days after that. So So this latest release, I would argue, is strictly because President Biden wants to avoid a massive slaughter in the midterm elections. So this is politicizing the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which was never supposed to be politicized. It was supposed to be there for our nation in a time of peril. But
right,
it's being used for political purposes.
Yeah, so the official story, if you were to ask the press secretary, the White House press secretary, she would say that they're doing this to help the consumers at the pump. We're trying to reduce the price of gasoline. We're even trying to curtail some of the inflation that we're experiencing. That's why we're doing this. And, I think the official side, the other official story that coming from like conservative circles, I think you kind of you presented quite well, which is that this is just purely for the political ramifications of this. The Biden administration is trying to drive prices lower so that people forget about this issue come election season. I have no doubt that that's a major factor of all of this. But Justin, what do you think about A, the official story coming from like the White House, but B, also this kind of counter narrative by like the conservative circles?
Yeah. So what I think is really strange about this is that I think you could make the argument, sure, that maybe this is really, truly, purely all about just we're trying to keep the price of gasoline as low as possible, and so we're gonna just take all this oil from the strategic oil supply and we're gonna pump it into the global marketplace, and that's going to lower costs. But it really doesn't work all that well. It doesn't actually make up that much of a difference. If you just look at the amount of oil that we're putting into the supply, the amount of oil that's normally bought and sold on the marketplace, it's really a pretty small amount of oil relative to what's going on globally.
Yeah, I said, like 20 million is the amount that we're supposedly use in a year, 20 or in a day, 20 million barrels, and this is an increase of 1 million barrels. So it's, what is that, like a 5% increase?
Yeah, right. And
so that would mean like a 5% reduction in price.
I mean, at best, it's a 5% reduction in price. That's not exactly how prices work anyway.
Sure.
But let's say that it's a reduction of 5%. It's like 5% is not much when you're talking about whether people feel like, because the price of gasoline, which is really what's driving a lot of this in terms of people's the political ramifications of it, right? I mean, it affects everything in the economy, but people notice it because there's a price everywhere they go, driving around plastered on big boards, and they can see the prices going up and everybody's paying it basically, or the vast majority of people. And a 5% decrease in the price of gasoline after prices had more than doubled at one point in time really doesn't mean all that much. Mm-hmm. So I have a hard time believing that the motivation here is purely just, well, let's just gut our strategic oil supplies so that we can reduce prices by about 5% going into the election. I understand that seems to be what's going on, but they're almost, I mean, how much longer can they even do this, right? Like that they're going to run out of oil at some point, right? And then the big headline's going to be there's no oil in the Strategic Oil Reserve, which doesn't seem like a very good headline either. And so what you're left with is the main justifications that are being put out there are this is just a really reckless move to reduce oil prices from people who are on the right. A really reckless move to reduce oil prices, which I understand, but if it is, that really the payoff is not that much, really. Or two, it's just this Biden's just stupid, basically. Like right. He's just an idiot and he doesn't know what he's doing. Now, I'm not saying he's smart because he's not. But I think there might be more to this. I actually think that there's something more to what's going on here, because when you look at that chart that Donnie had up earlier and you see how we've gone to levels that we haven't seen in 40 years or close to 40 years. I don't know how you could argue that this is purely just about trying to reduce gas prices a little bit. This is a much bigger move than that, it seems. And refilling it, because that's the other thing you have to think about, right? Refilling the oil supply. If that's the plan, if the plan is just, well, we're going to do it temporarily to reduce prices, then that means they're going to refill it at some point, right? But if you were to refill it, that would be totally in opposition to what people on the far left within the Democrat Party want, because they don't want people reliant on fossil fuels. So is the Biden administration going to come out and say, well, we're going to buy 600 million barrels of oil tomorrow?
We got to refill that thing back up.
Yeah, I don't think so. Like, that would be politically not helpful for them. B, that would actually increase demand and raise prices when they do that, because now you're throwing in this massive seller on the market, a buyer on the marketplace that isn't normally there, buying up hundreds of millions of barrels of oil every day, right? So it's going to raise prices again. The war in Russia, there's no sign that that's going to end anytime soon, or the war in Ukraine, there's no sign that that's going to end anytime soon. And so this problem isn't going to really go away in terms of the price of gas and oil globally. And so I don't buy it. I think that there's something more going on here than your standard talking points type stuff. I don't think any of the normal explanations make any sense.
Chris, I want your take on what Justin just said. But Justin, you mentioned the idea, and I've seen this in articles, which is probably, what's been going around, but it's this idea that's like at the lowest point in 40 years. And I specifically mentioned like the creation of this being in 1975 for a reason, because when you hear that, it's the same thing with like inflation, right? It's the highest inflation that it's been in 40 years. And you have this mental image of this like infinite timeline of inflation going up and down, and it goes up. And then for 40 years, it's kind of low, and then it goes up again, or anything like this. Again, pull that chart back up. It's like, this is basically the entire timeline of this. So yeah, it's the lowest that it's been in 40 years of a timeline of 50 years. So it's basically like those first 10 years was just getting started. Like, this is basically the lowest it's ever been, despite the fact that it took a while to get it up to where it was in the late 80s.
Well, I mean, you could argue that all the way up until if you look at the chart, really, it was on an upward trend all the way until like 2010, 2011 ish.
Right.
And so even when it did drop, they immediately refilled it. I mean, and then added more. And now it's just plummeting. And so it can't be. And then the other thing is, this is the Strategic Oil Reserve. The whole point of it is for really bad emergencies, not only economic emergency, but like war and stuff like that.
Right.
And in case anyone hasn't noticed, there is a giant war happening in Europe right now. And who knows what will happen with China potentially invading Taiwan. You have the president of the United States saying, despite people at the White House walking this back all the time, but he has on numerous occasions said that if China invades Taiwan, America's not going to allow that to happen. Well, So are you suggesting that we're going to go to war with China? And if you're suggesting that we're going to go to war with China and that's rattling around in that crazy brain of yours, Joe, then why are you draining the strategic oil supply right before we could potentially be going into a world war? Like, none of
just
this
so we
makes
could pay,
any sense.
just so we could pay a quarter less at the gas tank.
Yeah,
at the
we
gas
could
pump.
pay a quarter. Like, it makes no sense. A quarter less, like you mean a quarter, like an actual 25 cents.
No, that's what I meant. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Not a quarter total.
It's nothing. It's insanity. So I think there has to be something more to it.
All right, Chris, I want your take on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Justin. I think both things can be true at the same time. I think that there can be a short-term political agenda here, but also a long-term political agenda, which I completely agree that they want to undo our fossil fuel-based economy. Last night, when I was kind of like watching some news channels and flipping around, when Chris Hayes gave off his his send off to Alex Wagner, who took over for Rachel Maddow, I was just so struck by their brief interaction, because her introduction was, "Gee, Chris, you're so right. We just have to get off of fossil fuels. We have to do it so fast, so quickly." And it's just like, excuse me, do you understand that you cannot just snap your fingers and get the United States economy off of fossil fuels? That is just impossible. So I think there's a dual agenda here. I think that they're trying to, hold on to power, and they are very worried about rising gas prices right before the midterm elections, and they're starting to see some of the polls turn against them. So they're saying, we definitely don't want to lose, a bunch of seats in the House and possibly lose the Senate as well. So let's do anything we can. Desperate times call for desperate measures. So let's just try to, tell the American people, oh, don't worry, we're on top of this. We're going to dump some more oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to get gas prices to go down, so that they can then frame the narrative going into the election of, look, it's working. Gas prices are going down again. Don't worry, you have nothing to worry about. But I think that they also definitely have long-term ambitions of their insane green economy, which is antithetical with the existence of petroleum.
Right, it's antithetical to modern society. Yeah, I don't want anyone like listening to this and think that we're like downplaying the severity of gasoline prices going from $2 and tripling to $6. Like, I understand that's a horrible thing. People that are on a shoestring budget like that could wreck them. The way that cascades through the prices of everything in the market is, like, I don't want to downplay that, but like the point of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is for like absolute chaos, right? It's like your rainy day fund, and we're spending a fourth of that rainy day fund because it's relatively sprinkling outside. Like,
but
that's
I think
the
that
situation.
This is part and parcel with the Biden approach to governing. It's very short term oriented. It's how can we transform the country as quickly as we can, and if that means gutting the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, then I think that there's 100% fine with that. I agree with Justin, but I do think that there is a small part of this just to keep gas prices as low as possible going into the midterms, because I think that they're scared out of their minds that as gas prices are starting to rise again, people might change their votes here at the last minute.
So I have I don't disagree with that. I think there is a short-term political, at least it's a gain in the sense that they can give people the perception they're doing something about the problem, even though they're really not. But people will buy it because that's the way that it will be sold in the New York Times and Washington Post and CNN and whatever. But what I guess what I want to know is, so we've now drained hundreds of millions of barrels from the Strategic Oil Reserve. Okay. We are going to continue doing this for at least a while. Maybe they won't totally deplete it. Although if they stop doing this at some point, then prices will go up a little bit as a result of them not doing this. So I don't really know what the long-term plan is for that. But if they actually do continue draining it further and further downward, I mean, what do they ever buy it back? I mean, do you guys think they'll actually buy it back and then it'll go back up again? And if not, then what is the answer to the question of, well, then what happens if we are in some kind of like military crisis or emergency or something? How do they even answer that question at that point if they're not going to buy it back?
I don't know if they're even thinking that far ahead, but I do know that they are somewhat depending on Iran and Venezuela to come back online soon. And it just so happens that the day that Saudi Arabia, announced that OPEC would be cutting off their production by 2 million barrels a day, the Biden administration reopened negotiations with Venezuela to lift the sanctions to get them to start pumping oil again. And we all know that they have been, advancing the Iran deal to try to get Iran, back into the oil game. So I don't understand what their thinking is behind that, because why would you want to empower, a socialist dictatorship and a tyrannical regime in Iran by buying oil from them? But that's the illogical approach that the Biden administration seems to be taking.
Yeah, there's a couple of articles when you look this up that are just talking about how, the administration is putting themselves in a really tough spot here. And I kind of already mentioned a little bit of that, where it's like the administration has no other option to help alleviate these prices than just further press down on the gas pedal. And it just kind of reminds me of like the interest rates when, during a recession or something like that, they'll drop the baseline interest rate in order to kind of spur economic activity and to boost the economy. But it's like when we're at near zero interest rates and then we have a recession, it's like there's nothing else you can do. You've already dropped it to zero. Like we're going to have negative interest rates like Japan or something. And it kind of reminds me of that. It's like we're already, tapping into this. So if things get worse, what are we going to do? Tap into it more? Like that's our only option here.
Well, but Danny, don't you think the same thing exists at the national budget level? Our national debt just exceeded 31 trillion, and I don't see anyone on both sides of the aisle talking about actually reining in our out of control budget. So I think this is just like it's another instant gratification and kick the can down the road, which has become the norm in Washington, and is part, I think, of a much larger, decline of, America.
Yeah, I don't know. And to go back to Justin's idea of like, are they going to refill this? I'm not sure that they will. I think the calls to keep it in the ground are going to be kind of the largest chorus. I mean, maybe if there's, somebody with an R in front of their name that occupies the White House, maybe they'll try to do it. But then, you're just going to have the New York Times being like, see, they're artificially creating higher gas prices because they're buying up all this oil just so they could store it away.
Well, and that's
I know that's like
away.
a very right. That's a very cynical. It's a very cynical outlook, but. I mean,
so then what is the answer to the question when they say, okay, well, but you drained it all. So what happens if there's an emergency? What do you do?
We got
like, what if we go to war with somebody? What do you do? They don't even answer the question. They don't have a plan at all. I mean, I personally think that at least I think there has to be a plan for this. Because I don't think there's any way that they don't do this for no. If they just did it once or something, that'd be one thing. But for them to do it over and over and over again, there must be a long-term plan. And
I think all they're planning is that it's just any issue that's going to arise from this is going to be like just proof that relying on fossil fuels is unreliable. Like it's just going to backstop their own narrative. I think that's what their plan is. They don't have a real plan. They just have like a spin in mind.
Yeah. I think it's also just sheer incompetence.
Yeah. That could be. I think that we're going to soon see solar powered tanks and fighter jets that run on that you plug in to an outlet, do a 2-pronged outlet, and
right.
I think that's where
biofuels that are like 4 times more expensive than traditional oil and only get you as half the distance down the road. That's what we're gonna rely on.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's absolutely crazy, and I'll see what happens. But you have noticed that gas prices have gone up a good 50-60 cents in just the last week, and I don't know if that was part of the plan heading into election season, but it seems like that is because I've even heard just like, anecdotally, like I have heard people saying like, oh yeah, gas prices are going down, ignoring the fact that they're still double what they were like a year and a half ago. But like, that's the narrative now. Gas prices are going down. But now in the last week, it seems like that's completely spun 180 and it's gone up like literally like 50-60 cents now. So it's not a good situation for them going into the election season.
No, it's definitely not. And in places where they are especially concerned about this, because if you just look at a map of gas prices and where they're the highest and things like that, it's interesting how the places with the lowest gas prices are in the South mainly.
Sure.
And those places are all going to vote Republican no matter what, right? So what's interesting about that is the places that are experiencing some of the highest prices are places that there's a lot of swing states in there. And there's a lot of states in there where they have important Senate races. And so it's really not working to the benefit of the Democratic Party. I mean, when you look at, like, you've got Ohio on there, it's almost $4. Wisconsin is over $4. You have a really important Senate race there. Pennsylvania, really important, 380. And then, it's just, there's no sign whatsoever that this is working. If this is the plan isn't going very well for them. So I don't know. And by the way, one of the reasons why the gas prices are so high in a lot of these West Coast states and they're so low in southern states is it's got a lot to do with taxes. Got a lot to do with taxes and regulations and stuff like that. So it is possible that everywhere could have the same gas prices as the prices in the South.
Sure.
There's nothing particularly special about it. It's a global market for the most part. It's driven by taxes and regulations and all of that.
So yeah, it's an interesting topic. We're definitely going to keep an eye on it, but I don't know what else to say. It just seems like we're putting ourselves in a very tough spot here. So this next topic I want to get into, though, is one that's not getting nearly the attention that it deserves. So back in March, President Joe Biden signed an executive order about a potential digital dollar, or a central bank-backed digital currency, or CBDC. The executive order ordered various departments in the government to submit reports on a potential CBDC within 6 months, and to have potential legislation on his desk within 8 months. So now in September, that's 6 months after that executive order was signed, we were sitting there waiting for some of these reports to come in from these various government agencies. And finally, just a couple of weeks ago, the White House released a fact sheet. White House releases first ever comprehensive framework for responsible development of digital assets. So, Justin, this has been a topic that's been on your radar as of late. Is there anything in this fact sheet worth noting, or is it intentionally just broad and not really offering too much insight? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that for the most part, the big takeaway from this, because there was a lot of information that came out when the March 9th executive order was released by the Biden administration about digital assets, including the study for a central bank digital currency. A lot of stuff came out during that period of time, if you were paying attention, in their frequently asked questions sheet that they put out in their, their fact sheet, in their, they did a Q&A with press that was very lengthy, and they answered a lot of questions there. There's a variety of things that the Federal Reserve has put out over time. There's groups that are sort of partnering with various agencies and people involved in all of this, that have nonprofits and Hamilton Project and all these others that have put out a whole bunch of things. So there's been a lot out there. And I don't know that there was anything new in this in terms of what we can expect from a digital currency, other than they are clearly going full steam ahead on this idea. And
that was kind of my takeaway too.
Yeah. That's the main takeaway. There's lots of talk about financial inclusion and equity and designing a digital dollar that will help the environment and all this stuff. But that was we already knew all of that. All this is sort of the stamp of approval from the federal government, because all these different agencies had to produce reports saying what they thought of it. And so they all officially said, yep, we like the idea, or here's the good things and the bad things about it. And then Biden administration took that, or the White House took that, and they said, well, here's our summary from the federal government. Here's what we think. Now we're going to put together some task force type thing to continue developing this. We're going to encourage the Federal Reserve to continue developing this. Go out and make this thing happen maybe at some point in the future,
Mhm.
because they always throw that in there. It's like we're not sure if we're doing it, but let's keep releasing tons of reports and spending all of this money, all recommending that we do
Yeah.
it. So I think that's the big takeaway. They're not going to stop. Because if they were going to kill it, if they were going to say, well, nope, we're going to derail this train, then they would have done it now. Like, this is the time to do it. They would have gotten all these reports in and
Right.
said, nope,
No,
we've decided too risky. We're not going to do it.
yeah, that was kind of my takeaway too. So I was reading through this, and admittedly, I was kind of just scanning through it, and there was just nothing that was like, oh yeah, this is headline worthy or anything like that. Like, it just seemed a compilation of all the stuff that we've already kind of seen, just put into one report. But yeah, just like you said, my main takeaway was like, well, it doesn't seem like they're slowing down the train on this journey towards a central bank backed digital currency. And as I've mentioned before in previous conversations about this topic, I only expect the worst case scenario, basically from any government action. So a potential creation of a new digital currency is no different. I also am expecting the worst. So we've talked about some of these elements, increased ability to control monetary policy through some type of central bank backed digital currency. The idea of helicopter drops, where if everyone's got a government assigned a digital wallet, and they can just like add stimulus checks right into it. You don't even have to wait for them in the mail. They just pop it in there. Or the idea of like controlled custom interest rates, so they can give certain people, maybe to increase equity, financial equity, they can give certain people different interest rates based on the money that's in their account. Also, the programmability of a digital currency like this, where you could have these smart contracts that are applied to this, that only allows this money to be spent in certain ways or certain quantities on certain types of products. I saw one person refer to like a potential central bank-backed digital currency as like just turning our money into food stamps, where it's all dictated and controlled by the government. The idea of control of the use of this money, I already kind of went into that. And also the trackability, I don't think that's a real word, of this money, where like the government can completely keep tabs on every digital dollar that's spent and where it goes and whose wallet it comes from and whose wallet it goes into. So it increases the tools of the government. It creates a totalitarian system of the currency where there is no anonymity. And there's been a couple of stories that kind of make me feel like this, like we will get this worst case scenario that I'm kind of painting here. And I have all the links that I'm mentioning, some of this stuff in the show notes, so you can check it out. But Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said in March that a CBDC would necessitate the creation of a government-issued digital wallet tied to a unique digital ID. So the idea that you think that this might have some anonymous quality because Bitcoin and stuff like that, some other cryptocurrencies has. Seems like the Federal Reserve Chairman is adamantly against that. More recently, Jerome Powell reemphasized the need for identity verification, saying that a digital dollar would not be anonymous. So again, like that just makes it seem like the government's going to be tracking pretty much everything that a dollar gets spent on. So I like I said at the beginning of this, I know I have a cynical outlook on anything that the government does, but these couple of quotes from the Federal Reserve Chairman makes me think that we're going much down that path. And Justin did warn me about this, that he might have to drop out a couple of minutes early. He's got some stuff going on at home, so he is not on the call anymore. So just you and me, Chris. Chris, what do you think about all this, just from your kind of perspective? What do you think?
Well, first, I think we need to make sure that the listeners understand there's a huge difference between digital currency and a CBDC. Digital currency like Ethereum or like Bitcoin, those are completely anonymous. Those are decentralized, and those are a very promising technology. But what the Federal Reserve is trying to do, and what the Chinese are already doing, is having a monetary system that is completely trackable by the government, and that is the end of privacy. And that's why when Jerome Powell said yes, that this will not be anonymous, that sends shivers down my spine, because that means that the government is going to have a ledger of every single transaction that you, I, or anyone else in this country makes. And
Right.
that means that and like you said, that means that they can say, you're spending too much money on this, or you're spending not enough money on that, or
You're spending on this in this firearms store has raised a
Mhm.
red flag. Like,
Yeah.
and you mentioned, you mentioned China is pursuing this. So there's like 100 different countries that are pursuing it. One of the first and forefront leaders of trying to pursue this central bank-backed digital currency was China. So
Yes.
if we're following China's path, probably not the not the
Well,
best.
and Donnie, just think about how much easier it would be for China to implement their social credit score
Of course,
system with a CBDC in place.
sure.
Same with the United States. It would be a lot easier for them to control our behaviors, whether through sheer force or through nudging, if they have control over our money. So that's why I'm very scared about the long term ramifications of this, where if this is in place, privacy is gone.
Yeah, it's it, I also just want to highlight the idea that, like, a lot of the ways that people spend their money is very digital, right? You've got a bank account that you check the balance on your phone. You've got a debit card that you just swipe. A lot of people don't even have much cash on them at any given time, so they think like, oh, then what's the difference here? It's completely different. It's like a brand new currency that has all of this stuff embedded into it. So yes, while your bank could theoretically track what you're spending your money on, this pushes that all into the government's domain. So it's a completely different animal that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And
and-
and do you remember a couple months ago when the IRS floated the idea of tracking all transactions in and out of our bank accounts over a certain amount of money? And
it was like $600 or
yeah,
something.
it wasn't that the amount wasn't that large actually. Imagine if they have the ability to do that for every single transaction
Yeah.
that we make
Yeah,
every
$1.
single day. Yeah.
Chris, you've mentioned earlier in the show, and we bring it up on the podcast all the time, that you watch the mainstream or the corporate media so that we don't have to. Do they ever talk about this? Is this ever a topic that kind of gets into that 24/7 news cycle?
Not much. I'd say right now, MSNBC, CNNs, and the usual suspects are almost completely in campaign mode. So almost every single segment is about making the Republican candidate look as monstrous as possible, and making the Democratic candidate look as great as possible. But
Yeah.
no, I have not seen much about CBDCs in their coverage.
Yeah,
No.
and that actually is that should frighten you.
Yeah,
The fact that they're not talking
because
about
they're
it.
trying to hide it. Right. Yep,
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the fact that, like, the Biden administration pushed this executive order, the idea that they had this 6-month mandate for all these reports to come in, and some 8-month mandate for some potential legislation to be put on his desk, like, there could theoretically, in just like 4 or 5 weeks, be some big piece of legislation on Joe Biden's desk, or at least being talked about in Congress, about establishing a new currency, but the CNNs and the MSNBCs of the world just don't even want to talk about it. We'd rather talk about January 6th or something. It's insane.
Well, of course, but here's one thing that I have noticed, and this has been happening for years on those networks. They are anti-digital currencies. So the fact that
Oh.
they're anti-digital currency makes me think, just by definition, that they will be for a CBDC, because I think
Yes.
you have to remember, they do not like private privacy. They do not like decentralized power. They are in favor of centralization and centralized power, which
Yeah.
is CBDC embodies.
That is also another thing that, like, people have to know, is that this is completely the opposite of just like a cryptocurrency. You might think of Bitcoin and a potential digital dollar as, like, synonymous, but they're not. They're completely the opposite. One decentralizes control of all of this stuff. One completely centralizes control. Complete opposite. But we are running out of time. It seems like Justin's trying to pop back in here. I'm not sure if that's just some. Justin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'll
difficulties,
give you.
but-
We only have like 45 seconds, so I'll give you a last word on this. I know you probably missed Chris and I's conversation about this, but I'll give you the last word. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to take anything away from this, I think it is truly one of the most important stories that no one is talking about, because it has the potential to change basically everything. I mean, this is the ultimate tool to control society. If you have the ability to program a currency and how it can be used and how much it can be spent and how much of it exists, and you can airdrop $1 trillion to America tomorrow if you want, if it's politically convenient. I mean, it would completely transform the way government works. And because the Fed would almost certainly be put in charge of it rather than have the government in charge of it, because of the way that looks, it just looks politically better. And the Fed will do everything the government wants anyway. It will not be easy to stop. So if the Fed wakes up tomorrow and says, you know what, gas prices are too high, let's give everybody, $10,000 to pay for gas this year, or whatever, $1,000 or whatever. Like, they could do that and then just push a button and create it and then just airdrop it into people's bank account. And then they could even design it so that those dollars couldn't be spent on other things. So, I mean, this kind of thing is highly likely, I think, to happen if they can manage to get it through Congress. So it is an incredibly important story. No one pays attention to it because the media doesn't ever talk. The mainstream media doesn't want to talk about it. They don't want people to know this is going on. And the right is so concerned with a whole bunch of other things that this is one of these things that's just slipped through the cracks and they're not really paying attention to it.
And Donnie, Justin mentioned that the Federal Reserve could, airdrop, 10,000 or 1,000 and say, here, you're going to spend this on gasoline. Well, at the same time, they could also say, you only get to spend $500 a month on gasoline because of, your carbon footprint. So they could also restrict
absolutely,
very easily what we buy and purchase.
Yeah, it's an insane thing. I think we're going to be talking about it more and more, especially as we get more details on it. Unfortunately, we're sitting here left to speculate. And when that happens, and when I'm left to speculate, again, specifically about government action, I take the worst case scenario and worry about that. So we're going to be talking about this more and more, but that's going to do it for this episode of the In the Tank podcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Those audio-only listeners that are probably catching this on a Friday, you can join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon, streaming on basically everything, Facebook and Twitter and Rumble and YouTube. Join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the show. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, like I said, you can do just a couple of things that could help us. Won't cost you a penny, but it'll only cost you a second. Just hit that like button, leave a comment under this video, share this content. All these things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Also, if you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin Haskins, where can the fine people find you?
They can find me on Parler, Twitter, Getter, Facebook, or Meta, or whatever the heck we're calling it now, at Justin T. Haskins. And you can also go to heartland.org and find all sorts of good stuff there that we're doing on especially ESG.
Right, absolutely. Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Please go to stoppingsocialism.com. We got some really interesting and fun content up there. And the benefit dinner for the Heartland Institute is on October 21st. If you can make it, please come.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see some of our frequent guests here, viewers, to show up in person, meet you in real life. Heartland.org, you'll see a little thing at the top, featured image, or you can go to benefit.heartland.org for tickets and information. All right, thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.